morning, everyone. How's it going? Good. One of my tribal affiliations in life is I am part of a U2 fan club network. One of the favorite pastimes of every U2 fan, of course, is debating which album of theirs is the greatest, and it basically boils down to two. It's either Joshua Tree or it is Actung Baby. And as a strong proponent myself of Joshua Tree being their Mona Lisa, so to speak, this week my good friend Rob Vegas decided to put a bee in my bonnet, and he cited some dubious, sketchy magazine claiming that U2's best album was actually Actung Baby, which is entirely predictable. All of the cool kids prefer Actung Baby. It's apparently more experimental, whatever that means. I think it is more experimental, it's just not as good. But it got me thinking this week. So I want to have a little fun to start. It got me thinking. If you thought about Jesus' teaching as sort of a body of work, if you thought about his stories and actions as sort of individual pieces, as each a part of sort of his canon of work, what would people consider Jesus' absolute masterpiece? What would his masterpiece work be? So what I've done this morning is this. I've curated a short list of Jesus' greatest hits, you might say. And what I'm wondering is this. I'm going to take us through. I've put together 5, and I want to go through them very quickly, and then I want to vote here what we think Jesus' absolute best work is. It's a little weird to think of it that way, but let's give it a try. Here are the 5 that I've put together. Parable of the Prodigal Son. How can you not love that? Great story Jesus told. Son who goes off, comes back. Second, the parable of the Good Samaritan. All of us want to be a Good Samaritan, of course. For those of you who are like, you know what, Jesus' stories are a little too Radiohead for me, a little too abstract. Maybe I like the Sermon on the Mount. It's, just sort of straight, tells you exactly what he's thinking. Maybe that's it. Others of you might be like, forget those. I like the miracles. So maybe the feeding of the 5,000 might be your thing. Or others of you, maybe you're like, let's get right to Jesus in action. And so maybe it's Jesus when he stops a woman from being stoned, says he is without sin, let them cast the first stone. So if you thought about Jesus' works as sort of a body, which of these do you think would be his masterpiece, his one thing that you're like, this is my absolute favorite Jesus piece of work? How many of you would go with Parable of the Prodigal Son? A few. Okay. What about the Parable of the Good Samaritan? Okay, all right. Sermon on the Mount? Whoa, okay. I have a feeling that's going to run away with it. What about the miracle, feeding of the 5,000? A couple there. And Jesus stopping a woman from being stoned. Ooh, this is tough. It's either Sermon on the Mount or Jesus stopping a woman from being stoned, which is unfortunate because I'm talking about the Good Samaritan today. But that didn't really go as planned. All right. But even if you didn't vote for Good Samaritan, I think we can all agree, right? That this is one of Jesus' most well-known, best-loved stories. I mean, it's one of the most powerful stories in all of history about what it means to love. And yet, there's something fascinating and deep going on here with this story. So what I want to do is come with me. Let's pick up some clues. Let's start to play with Scripture this morning. And when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, remember, this is post-transfiguration. He's literally walking a path to Jerusalem in order to meet his death. He's walking a path that will ultimately take him to a place where he's stripped of his clothes, beaten, and ultimately killed. Let's remember that piece of information. So Jesus, at this point, you could say, is almost like a dead man walking, right? And then some expert in the law comes up to him during his journey. He's some kind of scholar. He stops Jesus with a question. Jesus, how can I inherit eternal life? And this is the key question on mind to all that follows. And Jesus, clever as he always is, turns the question around. Well, Mr. Expert in the Law, good question. Why don't you tell me what you think? Why don't you tell me what do you think the law says will give you eternal life. So the man responds, he sort of sums up all of the law. He points to all that the Old Testament points to, and it's this. He responds in Luke 10:27. He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. Now, this is intriguing to me because Jesus has just come from meeting with Moses, author of the law, writer of the law, on top of the mountain at his transfiguration experience. Jesus replies, yes, you're right. Live by the law of love and you will live. Now, it should be noted, I think, this is being said by the man who has lived by the law of love and is now literally walking to his death. There's a sense of irony there. The law expert then says, trying to sort of redeem himself, oh, wait a second, okay, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus breaks into story. Jesus said, all right, man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, well, of course, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. And generally, we call this the story of the Good Samaritan, and generally we interpret the Samaritan as the Jesus or Christ figure in the story. The Samaritan is a hero. This is the example that Christ is calling us to. To love is to imitate the Samaritan Christ figure. Seems obvious, and of course, Jesus at the end says exactly that. Go and do likewise. And the interesting thing to me is for centuries, Christians have. Hospitals have been built because of this story. Aid organizations have been founded because of this story. I would say millions, if not billions, of small acts of kindness and compassion and love have been done because of this story. All great and remarkable things. And yet, I'm inclined to think that might be missing the point. Because here's the thing, culturally and within the church, I think we've come to believe very strongly in the power of love. Culturally, we've sort of bought into the Beatles, sort of all you need is love. All you need is love. At churches, we've done the exact same thing. We often profess strongly that we're all about learning to love God and love others. Love, it's all about love. But in reading this story, my question has become this. Is that what this story and the Christian path is really all about? Is this the hope of the Christian world, to find more good Samaritans? If we can just find enough people willing to be loving and nice and good, can we somehow manage to turn this world around? Is that ultimately our hope? Pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps of love. All we need is just a few more good Samaritans. If we can just learn to love, we can turn this shipwrecked world around. Because that's what Jesus seems to be pointing to here, right? The expert in the law asks Jesus, what brings eternal life? Jesus agrees with the man that if he lives according to the law of love, he will live. And then he follows that with a story about what this kind of love looks like. And for all intents and purposes, this seems to be what Jesus is getting at. And yet I'm bothered by one question that I can't shake. If Jesus is saying, live by the law of love and you will live, then why is Jesus, a person who has lived by the law of love, marching straight to his own death? I don't get it. This story for sure calls us to imitation, but imitation of what exactly? And here's what I've been thinking lately. Telling this story on the way to his own death, I think what is being highlighted is that Following Jesus isn't just about kind acts and loving deeds. It's a matter of taking up our cross and following him into the mystery of death and resurrection. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to give you an alternate interpretation of this parable. But first, let me say this. I think actually what this parable is showcasing is this. Love is actually not enough. I don't think love is the point of the parable. Death and resurrection are. Because ultimately, I think love is not enough to save us or this world. Love won't do the trick. Only death and resurrection can do the work of saving, redeeming, healing us and our world. What do I mean by that? I think Jesus is pointing to this. None of us nor the world can be saved, redeemed, healed by our own efforts at loving well. Why? Think about this. From Confucius to Socrates, to Moses, to Buddha, to Gandhi, to MLK, even to Oprah, thousands of others, all of us here have had plenty of advice on love. And we haven't followed it. In fact, I think you could say this. For the past 5,000 years, we've been sort of bathing in wisdom and advice on love. And 5,000 years later, the world is just as dirty as ever. I'm inclined to think this. If the human race could have straightened up its act by the simple pursuit of love, it would have happened centuries ago. If all we needed was advice or better teaching on what love is, I think this world would have been healed thousands of years ago, but it hasn't. The world cannot be saved by loving. Why? Two reasons come to mind. The first is this. We simply don't love well enough to do the job. Our love and goodness are always flawed. I live in a century-old home. It's over 100 years old. Drives me nuts sometimes, especially in the winter, because it's freezing cold in there. I don't know what they were thinking when they built homes 100 years ago. Heat in the winter was clearly not one of them. And every single winter, I find myself doing everything I can to heat up my home. And so it's been kind of warm lately, which is great. But during the worst of the winter months, I literally, in the living room, have 3 heaters going, plus the electric fireplace, trying to warm things up. And no matter what I do, I can't get enough heat. I'm constantly cold. And what I've realized is this. If I really wanted to fix the heat problem in my home, I'd have to sort of strip down the whole house, start tearing out walls, build in new insulation. I'd have to take it right down to the skeleton. I basically have to destroy my home in order to remake it in such a way that it worked. And I feel like it's the same with us. We simply can't crank up enough love to actually fix this world. We just don't do a well enough job at love to actually fix it. And I can understand some of you might be arguing or thinking, well, maybe if we just try harder, if we could get the word out about love, if we could convince more people to follow the way of love, maybe we could make the world a better place. But for 5,000 years, people have been doing that. This place is still a mess. I know some of you are big fans of Brene Brown. Her new book is incredibly inspiring. I've just started. I haven't made it all the way through. But I've seen a number of people from Nexus referencing Brene Brown. Her latest book is called, Rising Strong. Lots of references to it. It's a great book. In it, Brene talks about this very challenging idea that I'm wrestling with, and I find that I love it. The idea that she puts forward is this. Everyone is simply doing the best they can in any given moment. We look at others, realize everyone is doing the absolute best they can in any given moment. And this idea of Brene's is like a double-edged sword to me. On one hand, it fills me with grace when I interact with people and think, if they're really doing the best they can, then how can I not respond with grace and compassion? If everyone is doing the best they can at any given moment, then surely, it fills me with grace for people and for myself. And yet this idea also fills me with a huge amount of despair. If we're all doing the best we can, well, we're kind of screwed, aren't we? I mean, if you believe what Brene says and you look around the world and you think, wow, collectively this is the best we can do, that kind of sucks. If we're all doing the best we can, then clearly we all can't love well enough to really do the job. Our best attempts at love are so messed up. I think we know this to be true when we think about it. Here's the reality. I love my children, you love yours. But we have, or we will, mess them up royally. And here's the key. When I cripple my children emotionally, or when my parents crippled me, whenever parents hurt their children, the majority of times it was not done out of meanness or spite. For most parents, the mistakes they make with their children are done out of love. Genuine, deep, intense love. I've already started messing up my kids big time. My kids have gotten to the phase where they're scared of monsters. I don't know, I think it started around Halloween. I would be taking Zoe up to bed and we wouldn't have had the lights on upstairs and she'd be like, oh, I don't want to go upstairs. There's witches up there. Witches. What? Witches. And then it turned into, there's monsters. I think there's monsters. Or dragons. There's dragons or dinosaurs. They're scared of T-Rex. Dinosaurs up there, scared. This has been going on for a while, and I'm like, I really need to help my kids get over this. And I had one of those ideas where I was like, brilliant, Dad. Dad of the Year award coming right here. Because I remembered back in 2001, a movie came out called Monsters Incorporated. And at the end of the movie, the monsters, right, they make kids laugh. I was like, oh man, this is exactly what I need. I'm going to show my kids Monsters Incorporated, and at the end, they'll realize that monsters like to make kids laugh, and they'll be happy, and every night they'll be like, yay, monsters. And I put in the film, and the opening scene is headquarters where they are testing out the monsters, how they can scare children more efficiently. So within 2 minutes of this film, my daughter Zoe was crying, Huxley was sort of shaking, and my wife is looking at me like, I'm going to kill you. I'm like, just wait, it gets better towards the end of the film, and there's a character, Randall, who's a really bad monster, always trying to scare them. This was 6 months ago. Almost every night since then, my kids wake up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m, what's wrong? I think I saw Randall. Oh, jeez. Oh. Kristen's not happy about that one. Messed them up. Hopefully that one's not too serious. But the reality is, I think no matter how hard we try, and that was done out of pure love. I wanted to help them. Mess them up. Think about something more serious. I just realized this morning, last night, there was another mass shooting in Kalamazoo in the States. 6 people left dead. I've been thinking this week about Columbine. I don't know, for me that was the first sort of national news event where, everybody can sort of remember where they were. And that was 17 years ago. Geez, I feel old. It's sort of the first sort of mass shooting, and since then it's just become incredibly normal, right? And it's interesting, this week I caught a CBC interview with Sue Klebold. She's the mother of Dylan Klebold, one of the 2 who performed this mass murder at Columbine High School. For 17 years, she talked about living in shame, fearing for her life at times. It was interesting, as she talked on CBC, she said, as soon as this happened, everyone thought we were the worst parents in the world. What kind of parents allow their kids to be planning some sort of gun massacre, making bombs in their bedroom? She's like, that's so far from the truth. She said, I loved Dylan. She said 18 months before this incident occurred, he got into a little trouble with the law. There was a break-in. He broke into a car, stole some things. She said, we were in constant meetings with therapists trying to figure out why would he behave this way. She said, I was the mother who went to all the parent-teacher nights, sat there going, how can I help Dylan? And what she realized over time, of course, is that there were some mental health issues going on with Dylan, but she said, the farthest thing in the world, I loved Dylan. We tried so hard with Dylan. And she had this one quote in the interview that just wrecked me. She said this, loving someone is not enough to keep them safe if their thoughts are broken. Loving someone is not enough. Keep them safe if their thoughts are broken. Couldn't help but think of the world the same way. Love is not enough to keep our world safe because it's broken. The final story she told completely devastated me. She said on the day of the shooting, she started to get word that Dylan might be involved. She couldn't believe it at first. The FBI, police came, forced her out of their home. They were searching their home. As the day went on, she became very clear that Dylan was involved. And she recounts this. She said, I started praying. And she said, what I began to pray was this: God, let him die. She got to the point, she said, my love can't save him. Only death can save him at this point. Let him die. Can you imagine praying for your child to die? Her love wasn't enough. Love is not enough. Love can't fix this world. Love can't keep us safe. We simply can't crank up enough love to fix this world. We're so flawed in our loving. I think that you could actually say this: if you want to start placing blame for why this world is so messed up, love might actually be a decent place to start. I mean, think about this. If you look at the thousands of patients that litter the couches of psychiatrists and therapists alike, the vast majority of those patients are not complaining or working through the devastation and damage that strangers brought to them. Exactly the opposite. The therapist's couch is often filled with people who have been hurt by the ones who have loved them. Our greatest sources of pain and hurt in life are not caused oftentimes by random acts of evil. They're caused by the very people who profess to love us most. Love might, in fact, be the single factor in making our personal lives such a mess, because we can't turn up the heat enough to warm this world. We can't crank up enough love to heal this world. And here's the thing. I actually believe that most people in this life, in this world, are really good people. I think in our heart of hearts, I think we're all mostly good people. The problem is goodness just isn't enough. I'm a genuinely nice person, I like to think, and I like to think all of you are as well, except for when my will gets crossed, or except when your convenience is not taken into account. And then both of us become so fearful that we can get mean and nasty with each other, right? And the point in my mind is this: if we're going to wait for love to save the world, I think we're going to wait a long, long time. And on most days, I think we can crank up enough love to get it going pretty well, but we simply can't crank it up enough to get to the level needed to eliminate the problems, the very real problems in our world. The second reason I think we can never be fully saved, healed, redeemed through love is this. I believe the world's deepest problem is not badness versus goodness. I believe the real problem is a word we don't use that often. It's a thing called sin, this very incurable human tendency to put ourselves first, to trust ourselves and no one else. And I think what this means is this: there is nothing, no loving act, no matter how good or noble or brave, that cannot be done for the wrong reasons. There's no loving act that can't be tainted, totally corrupted. I mean, look around the world through history, from the Holocaust to some of the concerns today we have over international security and borders. And I'm inclined to think this: the greatest evils in this world are done with alarming regularity in the name of goodness. We're doing this because we love our country, because we love our values, because we love our family, our tribe. Love isn't enough. Save, redeem, heal. I think what Jesus points to is this: if we're going to find salvation, redemption, hope, healing, it's going to be brought about as a new creation through this mystery of death and resurrection. Back to the parable. Because I think the actual central figure in the story of the Good Samaritan is not the Samaritan. The actual Christ figure in the story is the man left for dead. And this isn't my idea. This is Robert Capon's. And when I read it, my mind, it almost exploded. I'm like, you're kidding me. I mean, think about it, though. Jesus is heading to Jerusalem where he knows he's going to be stripped of his clothes and beaten. Is it any coincidence that he tells a story about a man on a path who's beaten and stripped of his clothes? The dying man is the Christ figure. This down-and-out guy who just by lying there in his closeness to death, in my mind, is the closest thing to Jesus in the entire parable. And I realize this runs counter to about 2,000 years of interpretive history, but I'm sticking with it. The story's about the man on the ground dying, helpless. And these two representatives of the atonement system, they pass him by because they're winners in life, and they can't understand in their mind how a wounded, dying man might have any saving power to him. And then Jesus brings in this Good Samaritan who is himself a complete loser, a complete outcast. He might as well be dead to the winners of the world. And this Good Samaritan comes in as the man of the hour, the outcast who deals with another outcast, a loser who comes to minister to another loser. The Samaritan, who is already a loser and dead, comes and involves himself with the dying man. And yes, what he does is done out of love, of course, but these acts are more than love. They are dying acts as well. I think you could say this. In aiding this Christ figure, the Samaritan lays down a massive chunk of his life for this man. He dies to his own comfort, his own agenda, his money, his time. And Jesus, I think, is doing something really clever in answering the expert of the law here. I think he's answering it in such a subversive way. Expert asks, how can I find eternal life? Jesus' response is this: if you want to find life to the fullest here, right now, then live by the law of love. It's the best possible way to live. If you want to find life eternal, then join me in dying. Die to it all. Because when we do, grace is right there. When we die to being first and don't mind finishing last, grace. When we die to thinking we're always right and we're in the right place and don't mind being lost, grace. When we die to being big and don't mind being small, grace. When we die to trying to secure our place among those who have the best possible life and learn to be with Jesus in his dying, learn to carry our cross, grace abounds all the more. And Jesus' question back to the lawyer about which of these three men was the real neighbor, I think it's a setup. The lawyer gives the only possible reply, right? Well, it was the man who helped him, showed kindness to him. Which leads Jesus to the punchline: go and do the same. Be with the man who's dying. I think he's pointing to himself. And I think to drive home the point, the interesting thing is the very next story after the parable of the Good Samaritan is the story of Jesus visiting Mary and Martha in their home. And notice what happens. Jesus comes to their home, and Martha is complaining because her sister, Mary, is doing nothing except sitting with Jesus. And she asked Jesus, tell Mary to do some work. Tell her to get moving, do some stuff. And Jesus, what does he say to her? You're too busy. You're too busy, just like the religious authorities were too busy to get involved in the story of the man dying. I think his words are, just come and be with me. Just be with the man who's dying for the world, and in that follow the path of death and resurrection. And I think that's the dark invitation of this parable. Be with Jesus in his dying. Follow Jesus in his dying. I think in my mind, the reality is this: neither the Samaritan or Jesus is an example of the power of human love or being nice. No, I think Jesus is demonstrating the saving mystery of death and resurrection. I've come to believe that neither human love or goodness can save this world, and we don't need any more sermons about good works or doing more. No, what we need is to continually hear the call to come and die. Take up our cross. Follow Jesus. Learn to lay our lives down. Die to being first, die to being found, die to being great, die to being big, die to having life nicely put together. Because the moment we die to that, grace is activated. And I think the choice is ours. This is the interesting thing to me. We can either wait for our physical deaths to do the work and to help us find grace, or we can get busy dying to all of that now. I'm going to ask the band come and close with a song. Interesting thing is, I think The path of love that Jesus traveled ultimately led him to the path of death and resurrection. On a personal level, this has been the hardest thing for me to learn. Dying. Dying to my expectations. Dying to think I need to be successful or first. Willing to be a complete loser, like the man dying on the ground. Willing, like the Samaritan, to die to his own agenda, his own time, his own energy, his own money. I think that's our challenge. And I hope through this Easter season, as we continue pushing towards the cross through these parables, that would continually sort of be with us in our mind. What do I need to die to? Am I willing to be least, last, little, dead? So when we are, I think that's when grace finds us. So we'll close with this song, and then I'll come up and close this in prayer.